We're going to start off the new Blackheart Bust series with this Morticia, I believe. And we've got a few reference pictures here. So again, usual micro bust style here. And I realize these are more painted up pictures, but at least it gives me a sense of the colors of the eyes are supposed to be in the face. So let's check out some more Blackheart busts right here. Some of these have been painted by Canopy. Oh, there's one painted by me. I've got a few historical ones there. And we've also got a lily, so we're going to try a few of the different monster busts here. So there's a Morticia there that's in kind of that noir style there. More of a grayscale. Here's another bust that I did. This is one that I'm also going to be doing another tutorial on. Painted this in a YouTube live. That was so much fun. See, I didn't really, all I have was a piece of paper with these references on it, so now I can have those up on screen. And they were all painted with the Mig Ammo Oilbrushers, just like we're going to use here. That gives you a sense of the size of the bust there as we return back. See, there's some decent details here to work with, so we can have some fun with that. And again, the oil brushers, it's essentially thinned down oil paint, so it's the consistency for miniature painting. Brushes are helpful for getting your paint out on the palette without making a whole bunch of mess. I also have my homemade oil brushers here. These are just little nail polish jars. Guess what? They also have a brush inside. And we have some, again, thin down paint, in this case a raw umber. I'm going to make more of these. I just have to get time to do that. Over here in our palette cam, you can see our white spirits. So it's Speedball, Mona Lisa. This is pricier than, say, some of your average white spirits, but you'll be glad to use this. It's not just the fact that the odors aren't quite there. It's gentler on the paint too. So if it's going to be gentler on your nose, it's also going to be good for thinning down the paint. Then we've got some are more greenish type oil brush colors here. We might use maybe some regular oil paints. Never quite know. I've got my usual craft brushes here, and we'll show you those. I believe I've got myself an unopened pack right here. So again, $6. There's 12 of them here. You can get them online. It's a number 8 round. When they're pristine and they're brand new, they have a nice sharp point. But once they've been used a little bit, they start to turn into more of a filbert brush, like this. This is a makeup brush. I like to use this for getting the paint on rapidly, do some quick blending. So I think that just about covers all the materials there. The palette that I'm using, it's one of these Strathmore pads right here. Let's see if we can, here we go. It's hard to fit that underneath the camera now that the palette camera is there. So we've got all of our stuff set up. We have some makeup sponges. We may not use these quite as much, but these are always handy. Ironically, we're doing something like this, and this is, I think, a lipstick type thing. Let's see how much use we get out of those. So we'll set up our palette here, and then we'll get into throwing some paint onto this. We have our colors out on the palette, and I just wanted to show you very quickly. So we've got the primed figure here. I was using the Stynylrez primers, make 12 different colors. You can see I got a few different ones on here to get some, a little bit pinks in there. I was really just trying to find out in advance of doing this where some of my shadows might fall, some of the details. So let's start to block in some colors here. We'll start out with our filbert here. We're going to go with a bit of that primer red color. I'm also going to have basically a shadow version of that here with a little bit of the field green mixed in. What the heck, let's make our palette camera a little bit bigger here so you can see that. Some of these initial mixes, I've got some of that raw umber there. See how that changes that color around. And then we can also do this type of a change to it. Warm it up a little bit. Lighten it up. So again, sorry if the brush does some kind of wibbly wobbly, timey wimey things. That's because this is a presentation camera that we're using for the palette. And I know it's not optimal, but I'm just trying this out. Just want to see how this is going to work. So let's move our camera back here. Make that a little bit smaller. And this is not like typical acrylic painting where you're just going to maybe do base coats or whatever. And oils, essentially everything is a base coat. Now you notice that I dispensed with the normal, taking the liquefied, thinned down raw umber and going over the whole figure. This is small enough. It is just the bust after all. We're going to do this in more of the, ironically enough, as I call it, the dry style. It's not dry at all. Once this gets some paint in there, I may have to do some changing on the camera settings, because what I've noticed is that it tends to get kind of shiny when the paint is freshly applied like this. Be amazed that it just seems to take a few minutes for that to kind of die away. But all we're trying to do is just get this covered. There's some changes. But before we get to some of the other aspects of this, let's get a little paint on the hair. Now the hair, we're eventually going to want it to have a little bit of a bluish tinge. We're going to change the skin tone also, but again, these are things that just happen later. So all I'm trying to do here is cover up the surface. Let's throw a little more of that Payne's gray out there. That's my homemade ammo brusher color. Let's get a little more of that out there. Again, it's not a black. It looks black, but it's basically the equivalent of, say, my blue liner paint in the acrylics, the Reaper liner paint. I think that maybe, for some of you, you'll know exactly what it is, what I'm talking about. And again, if it ends up on the face too, that's no big deal. This is not about painting in the lines here at all. All we're trying to do is just get paint on here. You want this to flow. If the colors transition and change a little bit, that's just fine. I'm also hoping to do a little bit of a painting on the plinth. And that depends on the drying time of this. We'll see if we can get into all that. I think there might be time to at least play around with that, because I've got some reference pictures of the Addams family house stashed away, and maybe we'll use those. So straight away, now let's see just how glossy this is. It's not too bad. I'm going to cut down on the contrast just a touch and touch on the brightness. And we're turning down the lights just a little bit. All right. A little touch more of the Payne's gray here. See, I had forgotten an area. All right. So we've just really quickly block this in, and you'll say, wait a second, she looks pretty suntan compared to the picture. Well, we haven't even yet begun to party on this. So let us get back some of that grayish light color back here. I'll throw some of that out there. And this is, what is it called? This is called Buff. Interesting name. Remember, we got some of these darker colors that have a bit of a greenish tint to them. Let's start to work some of these in. And the idea is that she's wearing that black dress. Maybe some of that's going to reflect here, and that turns the skin tone a bit more towards the green. And I know this just seems crazy what we're doing here, but we're almost creating a bit of an underpainting. Yeah, it's relatively on camera. And you have to think that this is why it's not really technically a base coat, because you see how that starts to just blend. You're going to do a lot of wet blending here, obviously. I think most people know that with oils, that's kind of the name of the game, is to be able to wet blend. But you see, as I scumble through this, it starts to pick up the color that's there. See how much brighter that is? That started out, remember, much darker and green, like this. But that scumbling over the face, that changed it. So you can see already we're establishing some shadow patterns here. So let's now look at our, well, it's almost a little bit on the purple side. And again, I realize that these are just reference pictures that have been colorized for the most part. So I'm going to redden this up a touch. And we're going to throw in a few more shadow type things, because we can very easily go with lighter colors over the top of this. Most people tend to see oils as a light over dark anyways. And what I'm trying to do is just pop in a few variants. Now, just like in some of the other oil painting videos, if I've got basically a little handy dandy brush that doesn't have paint on it, make sure that it's soft enough. I think I can use it to do some further blending of the colors together. I can only use it so much until you'd have to wipe it off, get a different brush. So this is another way to soften your edges. And we have to think further down the road. Right, we have to start to think about some lighter colors. We can do that. We can just mix a little bit of the light gray with their skin tone. We got, looks like it's in a decent place for people to see. And you can see it's fantastic that it blends, but I have to remember to go back to my original color here if I wanted to continue to build up to a lighter layer. Continue here on the nose. Well, what's going to happen is see some of that magenta-ish type color. That's going to start to blend in with what I'm adding. So already we get the sense of some preliminary shading starting to show up, and some tonal variation to things like these cheekbones. So you're going to really, this will be pretty dramatic here. See that? But what I'm going to do is turn it over because I already picked up some of the paint that's underneath. Now like that. And you see now I can kind of scumble away, feather away at that. And I don't want to go too pale with the skin tone, but it's going to be pretty light. I mean, she wasn't really, didn't see her as much as a vampire actually, but let's just give the skin a bit of a pallor, I suppose. But I needed to start. I need to start with some decent basics here. That underpainting. I'm sure you've even heard of it with miniatures now. Probably that term used several times. Yeah, I can do this with regular oil paints. I use the oil brushers. They do tend to dry a little bit faster. I may use a bit of liquid in future demos with the oils. One of its properties is supposed to make it interesting to glaze with it. And you know how much I like to glaze with the oils. But it also, see where the transitions we're starting to get here. But it speeds up the drying time. We'll see. There's a few things I want to make sure as far as if it's kind of sticky on the brushes, just how much you have to clean those out. But we won't focus on that now. So I can see that while this looks light on the miniature, it does not look light on the palette, which means that I've got plenty of space. I have some options as far as how much lighter I want to go. If I go directly to my highlight colors, well, I got nowhere else to go. I've kind of trapped myself a little bit. So let's see, we're getting some nice little transitions. I know she looks almost sort of sweaty with the glossiness of the paint. But I like the fact that there is that, you get that touch of green in there, that touch of coolness. Who knows, maybe that gives her more of a sinister look. I didn't want to lock myself into, well, I want it to look exactly like this. I said, nah, I don't think I want to do that. One of the ideas or the notions behind oils is that you feel like you have some flexibility. See how that feathers around that cheekbone, especially with, again, this is just like a 30-cent craft brush, but look how it, see that chisel edge there, but also a nice broad flat. So now let's get some underlighting here. I need some reflected light there because don't want that jaw to have that 5 o'clock shadow on it. That's no good. Don't want that. Let's do a little more on, a little more there. And what I have to start doing already is adding at least just a touch of the white spirits to thin things down. This is the part I want to experiment with the liquid and see. I don't want to say a substitute for white spirits, but another tool in the toolbox. Yeah, so see that all of a sudden now that lip has, and all I did, man, I just threw some random paint over the top of that, so to darken it down. And now by painting what's around it. Look at that. Totally changes. See, even the nose now starts to look different. Everything starts to stand out. And this is what I mean. There is no true, in the miniatures sense that people are used to, base coating with the oils. I call it blocking in. That's essentially what we're doing. We're just trying to figure out how light some of these are. Now, even at this stage, so I'm going to add a little red to this. Hopefully it's not going off the side of the palette. Got this in profile here. And I may need to thin that down, and by thinning it down, I mean just a touch. Just a touch of mineral spirits, not mineral spirits, white spirits. And the idea is to give a little bit of rosiness to that cheek there. But it's still relatively dark. It's still essentially a shadow color. I'm going to continue to just add a drop of my thinner. And we'll do the same here. We had a lot of greens here. Let's warm some of this up. Give it a little, again, touch of rosiness. So I see here there's not quite the darkened shadows under. Yeah, so we're going to lighten those up. Again, this is that idea that you can make changes on the fly when you feel you need to. So that has changed that just a touch. I'll continue here. What I will do is, I don't want to lose touch of the hair, although there's not a lot going on. What I'd like to do is get some of the shinier effects of that. So this is an off-white that'll probably mix even in with the hair. This is kind of, well, this one's one that I use an awful lot. It's basically the equivalent of the maiden flesh that I like to use on regular miniatures and acrylics. So let's, here, I'm going to lighten this up a bit, and you will see, once again, a difference. So see, we got, that's almost a little bit more on the greenish side. That's, again, still an underpainting compared to that. And when I put this stuff on, you're going to start to see a flesh tone that maybe mirrors what you expected to see based on those pictures. But just like I did before, see, I grab some more paint there, and then it covers what's underneath, but then I feather that out. You can see I still have a long way to go for lightening if I want to. She has, it's interesting, they're sort of prominent cheekbones, but yet they're rounded and softer, so they're prominent but yet not angular, I guess is the word we're looking for. It seems to be pretty good right there, boom. And you can see how that just feathers its way in. Now when these dry, they'll certainly be much more flat. They dry pretty darn flat, actually, the Mig Ammo Oilbrushers. My regular oil paint, since I thin it down so much, that also tends to dry pretty flat. I'm even starting to think here, because this is larger, I can even think about directional strokes. Basically, just following the contours. Following the contours of the face. If I just do brush strokes all in the same direction, now it's just going to be a cross-hatched piece. I'm going to actually turn up the light on that. Nope, don't want to turn it up that much. You can't see these lights, but they're my LED lights that I got from Amazon. I like so much that I use at shows all the time. I use them for photographing my miniatures. So see, we're building up these lights. See, I can use that chisel edge of that brush. Now, yellow this up just a touch. I need to get in here and get some lighter colors on these neck muscles here and here. But since I've got that greenish color already, boy, I can see as I kind of clean off the brush on the palette, I can really see how much of that green it was picking up. Alright, and you also have to, I've done that to remind myself sometimes that this ain't drying anytime soon. I don't have to rush. I'm just kind of instinctively rushing, thinking, oh, I want to be able to wet blend that, I better move. I don't have to rush it. And we'll continue with this, and then I'll grab another brush and we'll mess around with the hair a touch. So there is, again, just some initial blocking into the face. What I am going to do is set this brush aside here. I'm going to take me a smaller brush. What I will do is, so I have some context here, we're going to thin this down a bit. Get some, just something in the eyes here to make it lighter. Because this will tell me just how light my flesh tone can go. And this is not white, so I can still even go lighter than that. I think I might have mentioned in previous videos that with the oils you want to maybe sometimes give them even just 5 minutes to, as I call it, set up. Let's put a little more of that Payne's gray out there. We're doing the hair next. So, again, none of this is final, but we need to get a little bit of dark in here too. Get some separation. I'm going to be hitting that with when I do some more stuff on the face anyway, but what I want to try and do is get in here and just do the eyelash stuff. Just get that in there, because it's very three-dimensional here. It's really accentuated on the bust. And it's also, it's a cooler color. It's that Payne's gray, which means all my warmer skin tones, I need to see just how warm those are, how yellowish those are. Now I'm going to take a look at my, so what we'll do is thin this down, because you don't usually want the lower lid to get too dark. Okay, we've settled that in. I'm not going to be doing eyebrows yet. That's something that can wait. We are going to take some of this red here. That is a cadmium red deep, by the way. That's regular oil paint. So that's, again, to reinforce the fact that you can use regular oil paint. Sorry if I was covering up the palette camera there. Still trying to get used to that. And we'll just toss in a bit of this. Oh, good. I was thinking I was blocking that palette camera on you again. I know here she has a much kind of scarier look on her than in some of the pictures where she almost seems more, well, either quizzical or sultry. I'm not quite sure what it's supposed to be. But now we've got a little bit of brighter red on the lips. Once again, that is about establishing context. And I want some of this just here. All right. So let's just quickly work with the here. Again, we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves with some things. So we've got that Payne's gray. And what we'll do is take some of that flesh tone that we used. Well, see that now that makes an interesting, just bluish, purplish gray. And we'll brush this on in a few places. So it's almost going to give it a touch of purple sheen. We got some brown in here. So the idea was to get as many different tones as possible. I know it's not going to be super noticeable what we're doing here, but this is to set up the shinier highlights that I want to do. Alright, at this point, I'm just going to let this, I'll let that settle for just a bit. Give it maybe 5 minutes. Sometimes if you give it maybe 10, 15, the shininess goes away a little bit and you can pick up where you left off. So let's do that. Let's give her a few minutes to dry off, settle down. We're going to proceed with more layers on the skin and on the hair, working in some different colors. And speaking of different colors, I threw this out on the palette. What is this? The Mecha Light Green. Obviously for the eyes, but I want to work it into the hair too. I want to make sure that it's not just in that one isolated place. Might even work it into the outfit here. Reason being that it ties everything together. So let's, what I have to start doing again is thin down. Gotta thin down the paint at this point because we've been working for a while in the more opaque, thicker style. You want that paint to stick. Yeah, let's shift this up a bit so you can see I'm just working in that lighter tone. Get this where you can see it. And we're going to start to add lighter areas all around. And let's not forget the nose. And I always have to remember, especially, now it works both ways, whether you're lightening it or darkening it. you're going to be picking up those previous layers of paint. It's handy again, like here, where I can... See, that lets me do that blending there. That's nice. The downside is I have to go back in here again and get some new... grab some new color if I'm going to do that. I have to continuously remember this was dry, which you can do, and I've done it before, partially because I had no choice. The oil paint dried, but sometimes I did it on purpose. See, I just kind of used the flat side of the brush there again, grab some clean paint again, and now let's get above the lips here. And again, I'll look at a couple of reference pictures as often as I can. I don't want to get too locked into those. Still working on the forehead here. We get that a little bit lighter, a little bit lighter. And you can see how much lighter I can still go. And as long as I continuously refresh that color, you can see how much lighter that forehead is now. Sort of making a little bit of a on-the-spot adjustment here. Just wanted it lighter in general than I had it. And now you know why I didn't go ahead and try to put in the eyebrows, because I knew I was going to be doing this, and there's no point in struggling to repaint something when so overall it's starting to get more along the lines of lights where we want them. Can do the same thing down here. Can you see? Let's turn it this way. Yeah, I can see it. And I'm going to add, there's my red. Let's turn this upside down a bit. That's what I wanted. So I'm looking for it to be lighter, but then to try and show maybe some kind of like blood vessels around, because that blood vessels near the surface, just that's what sometimes gives the skin that more pinkish hue. This, I want to have more to the skin than just pale. In some ways, if it almost looks a little more lifelike to me, that's not too shabby. We've got that reflected light there. And over here, but not to the degree that I kind of kill my shadows. So I need a little bit of this. Again, I'm trying to match up the expressions that I'm looking at on the reference pictures. They are definitely different than the expression on this, and that's usually these corner areas around the lips there that can really change your viewpoint. So this, speaking of changing, we're making another correction here. That's just much more pink there in the cheek areas. You can see it here on the palette. It's a little bit on the lighter side, barely. Now, these are the little changes that you can do. let's get a little, oh, move this here so it's catching more of the light. And I see I want to get some this lighter pink on the nose too. Not a bunch, just some. I don't want it to be too greenish. So it's not a matter of just lightening things up, it's also maybe doing a little bit of a color change. So I'm wiping off some of the paint. And the idea is to maybe buff this out a little bit, smooth some things. If you let this set for 5-10 minutes, it works even better. Sometimes the paint is just a little too fresh. And let's move this. Here we need to get that a little lighter. That's helping. And I see the underside of the nose needs a bit of softening here. And it's reasonably pale. I know it doesn't quite look that way here. I've got the brightness turned down. Yeah, let's crank up the brightness a bit. Let's see. There we go. Get a little contrast going. So that's a little more. Like you can see some of that rosiness there on the cheek, right? Well, we focus so much on that here. Let's not linger forever on that. Let's get ourselves more of this Payne's gray out here. Remember I had that Mecha green out there. See me working it on the palette. Starting to make that grayish green. And again, this is not a dry brush. I'm just gently feathering a brush stroke over the top of this. Because yeah, we'd like that to be black. But I also want it to have some kind of color to it. A little more. There. Now I've got this sort of purplish color here. I'm going to throw that in, and that's going to go on some parts of the hair. So I've got to bring my reference back. Now, you have to be able to separate some of the glossy, just the shininess of the wet paint with what I'm adding here. So see that? Yeah, I think you can see that a little better. So I'm starting to add in not the brightest lights, obviously, but just some here. Remember, directional strokes, trying to follow the sculpt. It is supposed to be, well, black hair after all. Because, see how that brush stroke just smooth, boom, one stroke done. Now there's not a whole super lot of shading that happens down here. It's not just black hair, it's sort of that shiny black hair. I mean, the other reference obviously is just the painting, it's a piece of artwork, so it's really, really shiny there. But let's, yeah, do a little bit of that. Let's clean up that edge a bit there. So the reason I threw in the purple with some of the hair color there is just to make it different than the dress. It's not going to register as purple whatsoever. So I won't focus too much on this hair back here. We have limited time. I think you might have more fun seeing me maybe try and paint something fun on the base than painting that part. So if I have a do thingy like that, where I just did a brush stroke on the face, oh look at that. It's just blended away. No heartbreak. And this is where that chisel edge comes in handy. Now I could do this with one of my smaller brushes too. Let's see how I've got the... Sorry about the orange fingers there. That's not the handle of the brush. That was me working with fluorescent paints several hours ago. So it lets me be a little bit freer than, say, those finer brushes. Well, we'll be using those. Definitely use them at some point. But for right now, I want to stay more loose. As this starts to take that shape, a little more shape here and there. There's a little purple in this. Let's do this here. And I get these. They start to get progressively shorter. You can see I'm not doing long strokes of this lighter color. I'm just trying to do these shorter, more isolated zone. That's what gives it that shininess. I suppose it's the same thing when you're trying to do vinyl type stuff. So here's that. So we have to find a... See, here's the part where there's a curve. This might be a good spot for another. Yeah, that's a good spot for a series of these highlights. It's kind of a natural place to find it. But see how they sort of blend themselves in? Now look at that chisel edge right there. And see, look at how tight that line was. Again, that's a 30-cent brush or 35-cent brush, whatever, held on its edge. And it's making lines almost like some kind of pencil-thin brush. Again, I could use, if you're not comfortable with this, you don't have to do it this way. Now, I want this, I don't want it to be like a helmet around the head, but I'm trying to continue this highlight all around this particular space. You can see some places it's a little higher than others. I'm following the sculpt of the hair, but also trying to vary the heights. So let's do this. Let's give even more purple here. I need to flatten that out, and I'm gonna get a touch of my white spirits to help it flow better. And I need, see, this is where I'm just trying to follow the line that is already sculpted there. And then I try to find another line further down that I can accentuate. So all in all, this is a little less shiny just because I didn't do that initial glaze like you see me do so often. Now, once that starts to settle up and dry, you don't notice the shininess anymore. It's just at the initial stages, you tend to notice it a bit. See, the idea is that I do this with these broader strokes, and then, like I see in say, the illustration, and in that doctored up photograph on the other side there, I can go in with my smaller, finer brush and do more precise details. That's kind of how it's supposed to work. And here I'm gonna assume that these more curled bits here are just gonna get some more highlights. But you see that picture, especially the one, well, you can see it in both of them on the both reference pictures. You see those almost like lines of highlights, and that's a bit what we're after in some of these places. I'm gonna do the same thing here on the opposite side. Just, I'm nowhere near a white. This isn't, you can see, it's just a middle tone gray. But compared to the darker colors that we set up initially, by default, it just looks lighter. And I do my last row of these lighter right here. See, like this. Right, more there. Sometimes I have to go back and lighten up that paint, but I always want to keep that filbert shape. So look at how light that gets. Look at how that covers. Didn't really make it lighter as far as the color goes, but what I did do was put more of the white spirits in. And sometimes, especially with the oils, you want to do that directional brush stroke. Sometimes you have to reorientate the figure a bit. I don't often clean the brush. Every so often I do have to do that. So this is much more, even more of a green like what's in the eyes. Sorry, I keep smashing into the camera there. I'm just running this over the surface. So I can still do sort of a glaze over the top of that. I'm just working my way through. So I'm going to start to block in the eyes. We've got that green out. We've got it in a few different places. Got it on the hair, everywhere else. Even on the dress that she's wearing. So I am going to take some of the, the field green and the mecha green there. So we'll get start to place an iris in here. And I'll have to think which way, it's going to matter which way she's looking. If I just have her looking straight ahead, that could be sort of dull. Now each of these, it shows her looking off to one side or the other. Let's try that. And we have to decide, do we like that as opposed to just looking right at you? So trying to make almost like the eyes might be following you. So let's paint the other one in. Again, keeping it attached to that upper lid. Actually, I'm shifting it a bit, almost making it aligning more with the center. So we're just, again, I'm not quite sure. if they'll stay there, we can always shift those around. We could do it if it was acrylic too, but it's even that much easier with oils. So I say they have her eyebrows as brown. We'll do the same thing. We need those in there now because we need some context again. So that's the microphone hitting the magnifier light. And this is pretty thin down. That's why it's covering it. Now here I have to sort of follow what the sculpt has given me. So it looks like see the photo on the left-hand side shows this difference, so they've sculpted in that difference. This left eyebrow is definitely a different shape. And I'm going to darken that down just a touch more. Just a touch more here, same thing. And I've got I don't even know if you can see what I'm trying to do here. That's it, just over the top of that. Needed to hit that. And the bottom here. And this kind of comes to a point, but I don't want it to be a super solid line. I'm trying to break that up just a little bit. Right? Yeah. And gonna enhance one of this line here between the outfit and the body. Right here along this line. Okay, yeah, that was a good idea. I don't know if I'm gonna do the necklace chain just yet. That seems to actually not be such a super dark color there, so maybe we'll let that be more this color here. All right. Now what I'm going to do is, I've got this almost white color. It's not quite a white, but I'm going to see if I can't determine where the eyes, which direction I want to go. 'Cause I sort of like this off to the side, so let's try that. I'll just take this. And the eyes, actually, I might actually, yeah. Their eyes are a little bit, they fill up more of the eye, or irises, I mean, fill up more of the eye than what you see on some folks. So we'll have to make that change. We can always do that. We're going to do it right now. Like so. And I know they're really, really light at this point, and they're supposed to be because we got to add in that pupil and some other darker colors. But we're going to do that. We're going to let this sit for a few minutes. Let it sit for a while. And we'll get back to the eyes and some highlights on the hair and other details. Now that we've established most of the things, especially the direction of the eye, at least for now, we are gonna play around with those. We're gonna use, getting down into the use of the finer brush, we'll call it that. And I still have to figure out, okay, exactly how far over does each eye have to be. I'm also trying to, because these eyes are bigger, I'm also trying to get a little light to dark shading in within the eye itself. But I also want to start to think about some of the highlights on the face. Because we've worked pretty hard everywhere else. We can now start to think about, see what a difference that makes. You can do the same thing. And I'm going to thin it down a bit. And even this brush can be widened out to be more of a filbert style brush. Yes, you can do that. See how it's a little bit wider now. Let's get under this eye on the top of the cheek. It's a reasonably soft brush, so brush stroke pretty much stays where we want it to go. And as we do this, everything begins to tie together. Let's try and get some there. See how much lighter that is? Have to remember to go back and get some fresh paint. Because like I said, that's going to immediately start blending into your existing color. So I think I need to, I don't want it to get that light, but I'm starting to see here in a couple of these, so see I've got dark in this area. Doesn't look like it's supposed to be quite that dark. So let's get a little more light in here. That makes, yeah, that's making a difference. Maybe this side is easy. Yeah, this side's going to be easier for us to see. Oh, there's a whole bunch of dark in there. Just kind of gives it more of a sallow look. We do this and see it's just lightening that up a little bit. Let's do a little more. That makes a difference too. Because what the difference between it, and I used to do portraits all the time, that difference between it looking like the person and a close approximation doesn't take very much to all of a sudden to just kind of resemble that person as opposed to looking like the person. And I also want to get some light underneath here. That's a little too dark. And I think that improves kind of everything overall. Still need to lighten this side though. That just got a little too dark, so we are now again changing things up. Just have to be willing to do that. Yeah, that's maybe what I also needed to do. Is a bit, yeah. Okay, that was the other thing too. I was thinking there's all this eyeshadow here, and there's not. That actually needed to be light, so that helps too. Again, course corrections. So yeah, those are some big modifications there. But it really does change, as I see this now, it really changes that. So I'm trying to get some of that light back there. And now she's starting to look in the direction that I want. So wow, that's a big old change right there. Again, I didn't really see this show much past since being a kid, so I'm having to sort of re-familiarize myself with this on the fly. Alright, that's really changes that up. But before I mess around with that anymore, I'm gonna get my Payne's Gray back out on the palette here. We need to at least settle in for a pupil. And then we've got to get some really intense shiny green into those eyes. I think that is in a decent spot. See how that covers over that real eyes, and see how that starts to change. It's almost like I've reversed that picture on the left. So instead of looking off towards the left at you, she's now looking off towards the right. And at this point, I'm also gonna solidify the interior of the hair a bit here with some darks. You can't really see that, so I won't focus on it too much. Now, also going to reinforce some of these darks here where you've got the eyelashes. Alright, and now back to the green. I put some of my green back out here again, but I think it's hard to tell in some cases if it's a bluish green or if there's a little bit of a yellowish, because I'm going to do a little bit of each, just throwing out some cadmium yellow there. Just in case. Because we've lost some of the green. We made so many adjustments. Let's do this. There we go. Now we've got a little bit of green back. It's just the eyes are unusually, these irises, usually they don't reach quite that far down to the lower lid, but we're going to do that anyways. Feel like I need to make that pupil a little bit bigger. But now let's get a little bit of shading on the green in the eyes too. I got to really thin that down. And I may even go with a somewhat smaller brush here. Because I've got some of my old beat up tiny one hair brushes. Let's see how this works. Get that further down. Because I need to shade this. It's here where you've got, that's it. And you can see the difference between this eye, that see that shading right there, and see this doesn't have it. So we're going to try and get that same shading over on this eye. And if I need to restore my lighter green color, that is not a big deal. It's funny, she's almost getting kind of a pouty look here. So I'm going to take some of the Mecha Green here, some of that yellow. Huh, that's interesting. Look at that, that's a very intense green. That could make some interesting green glows. What I'm going to try and do is get a few specks of... So when you see... I need to lighten it up. A little white to lighten that up. Not too much. See that little tiny one here? Puts a little bit of sparkle back into the eye. It's that sparkle, that's what kind of gives the eye that liquidy look. And how's about that? That's pretty fun. And we'll take some of this white here. Now that I've got the super small brush, you can see I'm trying to make this round here. Just trying to round off these eyes, because they're so large, because, well, it's a bust. That we need to basically force the issue a little bit on that, making the eye round. Where was it? I was over here. So I'm shifting that eye just a touch. That's the tricky thing, is when they're this size, you say, ooh, wow, I can do all this neat stuff with the eyes, but then there's a few more things you have to then start to think about. So how are we doing here for being able to see this? So we're making the pupil a little bit darker. See if I can't get a little more reddish brown on the eyebrow there. And again, with this super small brush, we're thinning things down. I need to get even a little more light in this. Good, you can sort of see that. I did not see that there before. It's only something that I'm seeing now. I'm going to lighten this up a touch here. And the reason we can go in and make these little corrections like this is, remember those initial layers we put were just so messy? There was green in here and gray, all kinds of wacky colors. Now the reason we can make these little modifications now is we did some of the setup in the beginning. Now we worked an awful lot on the eyes. I'm going to let those set a bit here before I try to put my final highlight on them. So I'm going to need to stab back at this again. There we go. Alright, let's do some stuff on the lips here. I just need to make those brighter overall. Not necessarily so much pink. I have a magenta here in my paints somewhere. And that's... we've got a few to choose from here. I'm going to go with this one. This is more of an alizarin type here. Let's try this purple matter. This is Winsor Newton. Ah, yeah, that's what I'm looking for. It's almost like a blood red. Look at that. Oh, well, it's not on the palette camera now. It is. Look at that. That's intense. And that's the type of color that I want to put in my paint jars so that I have it available. Now let's really bring out these lips here. Boy, that instantly makes a difference. And now we've got ourselves some shading there. That really does start to emphasize that more of a pouty type look, I'll tell you that. And up here, so I'm going to try and blend that in. So there we go. And let us... Nope, don't want that. I'm going to go straight to this with some of my red here on the lower lip. And I'm going to have to put in that little bit of lip texture here. Just a bit like that. And it's interesting, this lower lip is almost a bit like a shelf. That's very different from what I'm used to seeing. Now, of course, the other is the makeup here is much heavier, so usually on figures I'm trying to fade that a bit more, but we don't want that here because of what this character is. And now I gotta go with some highlights on the upper lip. Get it in place. This will also start to make a big difference. And I must thin that down a bit. Where was I here? And let's do the other side of the upper lip. That doesn't need quite as much. But I do need to lighten this a touch here. And just like before, I can let that sort of sit there for a bit and go back in. And then do my buffing and straightening and lighten this here too a bit. Yeah, do the same thing up there. What I'll do is find myself a nice, soft brush here, one that doesn't seem to have any gunk on it. And I'm just gonna try and buff some of that. Tie it together. And I think now, again, those little course corrections that I did, that started to capture more of the flavor and personality. I need to get some light also on some parts of that nose. This needs to be lightened up. While I've got that, I'm going to hit the nose on that side and on this side. Those nostrils can be tricky. You lighten them up too much, and it brings too much attention to them. When you've got something like this that is just a naturally lighter skin tone, so I'm going to, looks like I'm going to try and place a dot on my eye here. You know, that little eye highlight thing. Where do I want to go with mine? I think I've got to go over here with it. You have to kind of choose one side of the pupil. I just chose that one. And that side. And we'll just leave that be. And I'm going to lighten this up. We'll find even some more highlights. So I'm going to look at my, yeah, this is just not so pronounced right here. This is also a tricky area here. That can sometimes get too dark in there, and that just looks weird. But sometimes making that a harder edge, that generates a little interest. And with this magenta color here, I'm going to smash into my palette camera and the regular camera apparently. But I'm going to see if I can't darken this down a bit more towards the purple. And try and fade that a bit. And let's do something a bit lighter here with my red. I'm going to actually get out a bit of, I had some orange out here. So this is a little orange against Mig Ammo. Let that mix in with my red here because it was just starting to get a bit too pinkish. And the orange helps keep it away from the pink. Now, try to lighten this up a bit. All right. Now that is, okay, so that's more of a ruby type thing. Well, this is handy for a little pendant here. And just going to go in there with, I'm going to try and make that a little bit more on the pink side. And if ever I just say, you know, I don't want to do that, I'm going to go back and wipe some of that away. And I'm gonna have to try and get some lights here. Up here on the cheeks. Then what we're gonna do is I'll leave this alone. Gonna leave it to dry a bit. At least not dry, but maybe just set up for a bit, and we'll go over to the hair and maybe the outfit. So I'll work on that next. We're going to move along to some of the more ancillary things here. We're going to mess with the outfit and the hair somewhat. Now, we've got this texture that's going on here. We also have to think about the hair and what we're going to do with that. Now I've got my Payne's Gray back out here again. And I'm going to try and reinforce a few shadow lines here. You see how that covers pretty nice. So, and this is that paint again that's been thinned down. You can see I'm working with the texture that was sculpted in the hair. I know to you it's just going to kind of look shiny, but believe me, it is darker than the rest of what's there. And you notice I work my way around, but I'm staying at the same general lateral place here. I'm not working up to the top of the head, because we're trying to create that sort of chain of highlights, but it also works for a chain of darks too. And let's go in here. And especially in here, definitely need our darks in here. Sorry if you can't quite see what's happening in here. It's pretty tough to see, I know. Just trust me, there's some darker colors going down in there. Like I've said several times, if you're more comfortable letting the layers dry in between, then by all means do that. Or let's say you're more like me and, well, you either get interrupted or you're just trying to get the hang of it, just get a sense of it. Well, why not just let it dry and get back to it later. And so here's something here on the top of the head. I never did solidify this. It's time to do that now. Trying to be as careful as I can. And that's also gonna define that forehead a little bit better. And the part here, yep, needs definitely gonna need some and so I want to break up some of that. It was just getting to be too solid of a line. Now, remember that purple color that I had out? Make sure I mix a little bit of that. We're going to go back to that lighter color. See what kind of highlight ring we can create here. Again, I have the advantage of now the smaller brush. And let's work our way around this here. You can see I can get a little more precise with what I'm at after here. Just trying to think about where that would be as it follows the contour of the head. And if something like that gets too bright, and I go, oof, don't like that. Well, that is now wiped away. Does not exist anymore. So that's the fun thing about oils. It's, in a way, it's easier to correct things on the fly. You just say, you know what, I thought I was going to like that there, I don't. And I've got this. I'm going to work on this top part. Gotta move it back a little bit for you, sorry. That's what I needed. I needed to attach that a little more to that upper lid. I'm gonna have to try and do this to the other eye. But just to, actually, all of this is still wet paint. This is, like I'm telling you that you can let it dry, wait, whatever. This has all been one sitting here. So you can see it is possible when you're very careful about keeping aware of what's thick, what's thin. You're going to be able to do some pretty remarkable things, and stuff that I didn't think I was ever going to be able to do with oils, on the miniatures at least. Right. Actually, see if I like a few highlights on this upper lid here. Gotta tone that down. Actually putting a little bit of the gray in there. So let's find ourselves some more lights along the side here. And this is what I mean. So I'm going to try and wrap this around here. I found a few places that seemed, see this natural curve right here. One right there. And then try and march this around. Whole head. We're thinning it down along the way. I gotta remember where we were. So let's see what's a good spot right about here. Because this would catch the light. And what this does, even though it's dark here, see now we've got that bright highlight next to the dark of the eye right here. And down we go. And here, keep going. That needs to be adjusted. It went in the wrong direction. Remember those directional strokes. And I think here's another place where I want a string of highlights to be. Same thing here. Just pick up a few of those. Try and make this appear curly with a tighter, more concentric, I guess, a little ring of the bright highlights here. Alright, I think the fatigue is getting to me a little bit here. If I sound a little crazy, sorry about that. And once again, another set of these highlights. And oh, I see this one needs some here. Gotta do some here. Now, oh good, I still have plenty of my lighter, that mecha green here. And I have to figure out just what we want to do with these. I guess there's, what is it, the silk, where you can alternate with light over dark and vice versa. Let's see if I can maybe create some of that effect here. It's kind of a swirling pattern. I don't even know if you can see it. It's kind of on the shiny side. I just didn't want it to necessarily be all dark. But what I can do now that I've got some of this lighter color in here, I could even let this dry and then go in with the darker glaze over the top of it. And again, it looks super light, but it really is not. It's basically a middle tone. And try and get a few indications of the texture here. Also, when this stuff dries, some of that texture comes back. I think it's the other thing from a composition standpoint. You have to figure, well, how much interest do you want to have leading down to the base? Now, I did want to paint something here, maybe the Adam's family dwelling, something like that, but that's gonna definitely have to wait till another episode. Well, not another episode, but after this at least dries a little bit. That's for sure. And I'm gonna see if I can't find a bit of lighter skin tone color. Just have to thin this down, because boy, this paint is already wanting to set up. That's what's really interesting about this. Alright, where are we? Good, you can see that. I like the face. Just gonna try and get a few lighter areas here to contrast this. Same thing here. A little of that. Now I'm gonna get some of my pink color back in here. A little more. Just lighten that up a touch. And then, where's my yellow? Bring that back out again. It looks, I can't quite tell based on the... Well, let's see if we can make that bigger. See if that helps. So it's... Okay, so there is... so I need to get some metal type effects on this. It's more of a chain, although it looks more like a rope here. But let's just do a little bit of this. And on the corners of this, make it look like just a setting here. Now, let's get a little of the bright magenta into here, lighten up some more. Let's try and get this blended a bit here. That's a very different kind of wet into wet blending. That's almost more like what I would do with acrylics. Here, let's get ourselves some kind of a... So this is something that I can also play around with more. Maybe when things dry. Well, I look at the eyes and I see how those have... Even that part of it has lost an awful lot of the shine. So we got our dark color here. Let's get some of the hair darkened. Let's see what happens. I'm going to try a few little capillary glazes here. Yeah, that's following the pattern reasonably well. Okay, this is gonna, I think, do what I was hoping. So this is where I'm taking the darker color here. So we want it to be, the pattern got lighter where the color was darker, and now, see, we'll add these darks where we've made the overall cloth lighter up here. Alright. That looks a little strange there. We'll kill that. So now we've got a bit more texture on the outfit. And I definitely advise with the oils, you step away from when as they're drying, you just let them do their thing. And you can assess, you might want something lighter. You may say, no, that needs to go darker. Here, let's take our little blending type brush and do that in a few places here. There we go. There's some places where it's just hard to get a nice, smooth brushstroke that ends. So I just pulled away at the ending of that. Do the same here. I'm just going to pull away at the ending of that brushstroke. Softens it out. Definitely going to hit these in the same way. Overall, it just blends that together. This is the beauty of the oils. And what it does is it also serves to darken those highlights just a touch. If I feel they're just too intense, too bright, or even here's some of my darks doing the same thing to those. So, but at the risk of just, let's take some white here. It's one of the last things I'm going to mess around with on the actual thing here. Again, I might do some cleanup stuff afterwards when I can get a better angle, because sometimes I just cannot physically reach or get to some of these parts. Here we got a little brighter thing here. Let's make this more of a, like I saw in that picture, a few little bright shots. And leave it at that. Maybe a few spots up in there, so we added some texture there. And what the heck, I'm gonna do some interesting things here maybe. While I've got that color. And I can always, again, well, let's soften that a bit. That's all it takes. A little bit. Can do all that here. Some of these got a little too prominent. Tone them down. And the upper lip, I see I have to do some things with that too. Make that a little more dimensional. And I see that I need to lighten up. This will be a tricky here. I'm trying to see just how the face is. These little right here underneath the. I have to see if that's gonna work or not. Because I don't think it can be quite that dark. This is another one of those adjustments. I see I need to also go a bit maybe lighter here. Just trying to nail down the corners of the lips here. So what we're going to do is we'll just leave this as it is, and we'll get back to this. This should be a whole lot less shiny when we come back to maybe see if we can paint something on this base, see if that actually will work there. The last thing we're going to try and tackle with this demo is the plinth, and you can see I've got some references over here. I'm not going to do quite as many of the lit windows as you see in that little model type thing there. Gonna maybe try for some kind of moonlit sky. It's gotta be subtle, more like the one in the lower right, because otherwise it's just gonna take away from the face. And we'll try to do this with oils here. So what we need to do is have some dark here. We got that Payne's gray. These are our two homemade ammo colors here with the thin down material. Now let's make sure we've got our focus good here. And we're going to try and block this thing in. So that's going to be your central tower there. And do I want to do this straight on? Seems like it's always that more dramatic perspective here, and all I'm trying to do is just block this in. So this is really more two-dimensional painting here. And this is where we decide, well, is this something that's we're going to want in here? Or is it just, it's just not going to work? There's no way to find out for sure until you just kind of give it a try. And none of this is obviously permanent whatsoever. All we're going to do is block in. We got our just some trees here. So again, this is the idea behind this is to be as, and I'm going to go all the way around because first there's that Blackheart Models logo there, but my fingers have to go somewhere. So, and this is the nifty thing here. We'll get one of our magic makeup sponges and get this where you can see it. And this is the nifty thing. Remember that conversation about wet oils over dry oils. Well, the oils on the figure are dry. See how I can just scumble this into basically that's now it's primer, but it is possible to kind of simulate that wet into wet blending without actually doing wet into wet blending. It's important to get rid of some of the excess here. So you can already see how there's sort of a silhouette already that's working here. And just getting rid of some of the excess here. And then now we want a Moonlit Sky. Well, we want that to be a little more bluish, so I took some of the purple there and some of my Payne's gray. The idea is up in this area to get maybe a few dark cloud type things. You can see how thin this is. You definitely want to start out thinner here. What I'm going to do is have this be feathered out here, just like our previous layer where we did kind of the house and such. Just at some point I think I have to do some, I don't know, maybe 2D landscapes. Boy, I haven't done one of those in forever. Maybe some 2D oils that might actually give some folks even a better perspective on this and where I'm coming from. So I will do the same thing again here. We're going to blend this out. And not too, just with very little efforts here. We've already got kind of a silhouette thing going. I'm looking to see where is, because I don't want to have to do it this way. I'm going to change the angle of my camera just a bit here. just a touch so that I don't have to have it quite as much in the light. Alright, so we've got that. Now what I am going to do is, remember that green we used in the eyes? So I'm going to mix some of that in with, it's kind of a greenish gray. I'll toss a little bit of blue in there because we want that bluish moonlight going on, I think. You can see even the grayish color of the sky there. So we're going to start out with the it being somewhat darker here. I'll let that blend back into here. Gonna do same thing over here. And let those blend together. Now the original, the house is getting wiped out a little bit. That is no big deal, because we're about to dive into some lighter grays here. And I think you've seen this on some of the other. That's not too bad. I know it's somewhat of a weird angle, but here we go. It's that negative painting again. You paint what is not necessarily there. Let's see that just how we blended it before. And blend some of that again. And the whole idea, remember, this is to just be super subtle. So if we put a bunch of hyper details on this thing and people are looking at panels on windows, they will not be noticing all the work that was spent on the bust. And that is counterproductive. Now there's a good angle. And just like I did on the other side, because you can go back and forth with this. There you go. A little bit of bonus coverage here. I know it's not quite a portrait or whatever, but I thought for those who might be wanting to do some kind of maybe a mural fresco behind the figure, well, what better way to make it look like an oil painting than to have it be an oil painting? What do you know? I'm using a little bit of that yellowish ochre type color. Maybe this is where your moon could be here. Maybe that's where it's going to be. You can do some highlights on your clouds or something there, maybe. Same thing up here. Start to do maybe a few blends. Again, the idea is to keep this pretty subtle. So we're gonna kind of highlight the underside of that cloud. And nice thing about oils is if it does get too noisy, you can always knock it down. So here we have our, again, some kind of lights hitting some clouds. And I can just take that and very rapidly, no fuss, no muss, knock that down. Yeah, the whole idea is just be very as subtle as can be. Let's get a little bit of light over here. Maybe even make it a little bit lighter down there so there's something that'll make those trees, when those go back in there, make them look a little more like they're silhouetted. Here we go. Just trying to make it almost look like it's a bit on a hill as opposed to just on a street. Let's get that same brush again. Just move that around. So I think you can see what direction we're starting to go with this. And of course, nothing near white. Maybe where the moon is. And I'm trying to offset this. I don't want this to line up with where the bust is there, because that would just, that's going to be way too noticeable, and I might have this cloud somewhat cut in front of the moon there. We can go back with our darks later on. Now before we get too far into the sky, let's go back to the building here. We're going to throw a little bit of a lighter color there. I know it's going to be tough to see. It wants to be reflecting everything. So see, now we're putting a little more of the opaque color in there. So that's more of that front face of the wall. See, now this will be in shadow. And up here, I don't necessarily want to be picking out individual dormers and everything else because, well, it's not gonna help us in our quest to not detract from the original portrait. So we're getting some very subtle shadow side on the house there. It's a bit of lighter color there. Going back to the Payne's gray, maybe even a little more of it. Get that, just a hint of an awning here. And then up where that cloud is, even here. So we have a little bit of an effect of the cloud in front of the moon. Because that's always neat to have that. But as I do this, I definitely have to... One thing I've never had a chance... I don't think I ever had a chance to paint a spacescape with oils. So that could be a pretty fun thing to try too. Of course, I can always paint a spacescape on some kind of a miniatures project, but you can see we got our starting to get our little house on the hill there. So I'm going to change my focus again, because it looks like that part does not have too many reflections, if it's going to let me actually paint there. So now I am going to grab a touch of that white, a little bit of that blue. Ah, good. Not so reflective. See, that's a little brighter now. A little brighter on some of these clouds. And there's maybe some kind of shutter details here. I'm just going to start to block in a few things. I'm going to go back to this over here, because this has to sort of stick out in front of the rest of the structure. You can see I'm trying to use the little bit of directional strokes as well in here. Now this is, to me, this is always the fun part of oils, is this sort of middle tone type color here. And at this point, I don't want to... Yeah, what the heck. I am going to grab another brush out here and put in some of the trees. See just how I like that. Yeah, I want it to be sort of up on a hill, but let's put a few... I actually got almost like a little fan brush type here. I think some of you, the Bob Ross fans, may have seen something like this. I'm actually going to have the trees go in front of the porch of the house. Just again, I don't want this to be about the plinth. It's supposed to be about the figure on the plinth. And there may come a point where I just feel like, wow, that was too much, and I may just paint over the whole thing. So here's, again, another, they're starting to do a little tree right there. Yeah, those fan brushes, they never quite worked the way I wanted them to when I was a kid. It's pretty funny that I'm able to make my own now. And I just put a little turquoise in with that brown to sort of get myself a bit of a green. Here, doing a tree canopy here again. You can see how the brush kind of goes this way and that way. And then I try to leave a few gaps in there. And just gonna work this back this way, and we'll figure out later on. You don't really need to see how I'm gonna paint a logo on the back of a plinth. That is not important. And this stuff over here, I'll probably just paint that with acrylics or whatever. I think that's what I've done in the past. I'm just gonna throw this over here. Like this. Let that blend together. Just have it be mostly dark. Because we're just trying to make this a nice, soft, subtle scene here. And remember, we always have our white spirits there to help thin things down. I'll put some of this in here. Yeah, I can always... It's a little easier to make with the oils at this point. It's always easier to make it a little bit lighter than it is to make it darker. So I'm just trying to get the sweep of that roof there. And we'll put a few little subtle highlights on some of the trees. I don't want to have outlines or anything like that. Certainly don't want that. And remember, I can work this back and forth and back and forth. That's the nifty thing about oils. And again, we'll do some dark on, there we go, on these awnings and make that more of a line. Get the perspective of this going here. And back here, a little on the trees. And there's the the front porch that's here. We'll make that dark also. That should do it. And you notice at this point it's more about adding dark than it is making things lighter. It's supposed to be a nighttime scene after all. Now I still have that option of doing the sort of reddish windows. But that may just call too much attention to the house. I don't want that much attention there. So I'm trying to remove a little bit of the highlight on the roof of the house there. Just trying to take a little bit of that away. And just use a little bit of that warmer light color, because if the house has a little bit of warmth to it, then it will come forward. We don't have to come forward a lot, but what I'm trying to do is get a few of these boards painted on here. If it's thin down, it will cover. So it is obviously thin enough because it is covering. It's just a little tiny touch of subtle texture, that's all. And on the tops of these awnings here, it's when you have multiple reference sources like this, it can be a little tricky sometimes because you're basically trying to manage several different angles all at the same time. So I understand that. So I just wanted the cloud to carry over here a bit more. I think I still have a blending brush here. I can go at the bottom of that. And here. So I think I may just try. I'm going to see if I can get myself a mix of some kind of an orangey color. I just want to see what happens. Again, I may hate it and I may immediately try to cover it. There's no way to know until I actually try it. And I'll thin this down. Oh, let's see. So we're going to have one up here. One there. And then I'm going to start not so bright and go from there. And again, I'm working with two different sources here. So again, I have to try and make these work together. And I guess I can do a door there. Can have a few windows maybe on that side, and we're just doing this again really, really subtle for right now. I'll do one here, one there. And then there's got to be, so I can't tell if there's two here. Well, we'll go with two here just to be different. Alright, so it maps out where I maybe want these windows to be and their glow. And now let's make something a little brighter. And I'm gonna go with this, not the one up top quite so much, just a little bit there. You see how that covered? And I don't want 100% of the window to be painted in with this orange, just a chunk of it. Like there's curtains or whatever. And this window, maybe make this one a little bit brighter. You notice I do a couple of brush strokes and then grab new paint. Because again, it's wet paint, so what's underneath is being pulled up into it. And it'll all, obviously, once it dries, that kind of changes the look of it just a touch also. Let's get some on the roof here. And tree line. Gonna fade that out a bit. So I hope this shows you a few useful things as far as the oils go and what you can do with them outside of strictly just painting the miniature itself. So here we'll highlight a few of the trees. We're using the exact same colors from the moonscape, I guess we can call it. So it's not all completely just shadow. I'll just cut in front of that a little bit. Throw some here to create a bit of a foreground. And we'll start to blend some of this. Soften that up. Soften that up, make it more subtle. Just like we did with the sky. Yeah, we can even take your smaller brush here. Because this is not something where I want to pick out each individual leaf on these trees. That is not going to bode well. I'm just trying to get some of these little things that stick up off of the top of the house. One more. See where the front porch is here. Maybe a few indications of the supports for the front porch. Man, if I want, I can wait till this dries and refine some things to and it's your miniature bust, whatever. This is only about suggestions here. This is not about you must do it this way or that way. And just try to throw out a few helpful hints here and there. Hopefully it makes it a little more fun for you. So let me do a change on our focus here, and let's back this out. And I know it's a little bit shiny. You can see we've got nothing that's any lighter than what's in the face. We have yellow and orange here in a few different places, so that's not going to conflict too much there. And when you see it from a distance, just kind of looks like their house, little house, and it'll be, once it all dries, you're not going to have to see the shininess anymore. So, because you're seeing a drier portrait up here with obviously some fresh wet paint down here. I can soften this up even more. It's the nice thing when the paint just even has, like we've talked about many times, even if it just has 5 minutes to settle and set, it can make a big difference. I just felt like I needed something light here. And you'll see in the, well, obviously the opening and closing credits, you'll see how this part was finished off here, that part, what final decisions were made on that. And again, just keeping it as muted as possible. And here, I'm not quite sure what I want here. I don't know if I want a road or a trail up to the front door. I'm going to grab some more of the Payne's Gray real quick here, throw that out on the palette down in this corner, like so. And drop in a few darks here, kind of like what we have up in the sky. So it almost looks more like a trail that leads up to the haunted house on the hill. Picking out just a few shadowy leaf areas. Same thing on this side. Few little shadow things on our roof and awnings. And I will just leave it at that. And this, you wanted to see a bust being painted, not a plinth. But there's a few ideas for you on your plinths. And just thanks for hanging out with me here, watching this being painted. This is Morticia from Blackheart Models. And hopefully this will help you with even maybe some faces on regular miniatures or some larger scale figures too.